Hello! That was my getting ready to go live dance. I don't know why I always feel like I have to dance in like the getting ready. I don't know what to do with myself, so I'm just like, yeah. Hello everybody. Welcome. Clearly, this is the energy you can expect all hour this evening. I hope you all are as amped as we are. My name's Janae. My pronouns are she, her. I am co-managing director here at Fandom Forward. I also have an assistant with me tonight. This is Sadie. She's going to be joining me. If she makes noise, please forgive her. She is also one of my mental health resources, so she's along for the ride. Um, let's start by sharing just your name, pronouns, and maybe like your favorite Marvel character or property. I was trying to think about this. I was like, I don't know that I have a really strong like favorite character, but my favorite MCU series is definitely the Thor movies. So that would be my fave. I'm just gonna call on y'all in the order you are in on my screen. Cassie.
Hi, I am Cassie. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a contractor with Take This. My pronouns are they, them, and I always struggle with this, but I'm gonna go with Black Panther again as
Nice.
my favorite movie, and either Jessica Jones or Luke Cage is my favorite shows.
Mm, excellent picks. Krisha.
Hi, I am Dr. Krisha Anderson. I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor, and my pronouns are she, her. It is really hard to answer the favorite.
I know, right?
And I love Thor very much. I really love the dynamic between Thor and Loki.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll go with that one today, but it really just changes.
Yeah. Depends on which movie came out most recently. Jay, what about you?
So it's funny, you said favorite Marvel, and then you start saying MCU things, and those are two different things. So
They
I'm going to
are.
answer for both.
Yeah,
So
please
my
do.
favorite Marvel character is Monica
Mhm.
Rambeau, and
Nice.
my favorite MCU experience was Black Panther.
Nice. Yeah, God, Black Panther is such a good freaking movie.
Akina, I will recognize my backdrop. Yes, that is Wakanda.
Yeah, I should say up top, I specify between Marvel and MCU because I love the MCU and know very little about the comics. So I lay my cards out for people right up front, and I'm like, listen, I know that I'm talking about the MCU, and I have no way to know to comment on what goes on in the comics. But yeah, I am really excited to have you all here tonight talking to us about how do we find resources. There's been a really interesting sort of shift in the MCU properties recently. And Jay or others, if you all are comics readers, maybe you can talk about if this is reflected in the comics as well. There's definitely been a lot more of showing on screen the impacts of being a superhero and how that's affecting them mentally and physically and in community and their relationships. And I've been really excited to see that. There's definitely, some wins and some moments and how those things have been portrayed. And I'd love to sort of dig into that tonight. Um, so we've been talking a lot about life after the blip. And in our own lives, what that means, sort of as we've experienced our own blip in this big, sort of world altering event of this shared trauma on a scale that we have not seen for a while. And so there are a few different ways that they've been kind of showing how the Avengers and other characters are getting support. So I wanted to just start by like going over, okay, what did you all think? What are the live reactions to how these things were portrayed? So the first one we were thinking about was in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I will say the things up top. So if you haven't seen these shows and you don't want to be spoiled, you know when to close your ears. But so in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we see Bucky and Sam actually attend therapy, which was kind of wild to see in a Marvel film, especially with two male leads. That was really interesting to me. What did you all think about that portrayal? And, you know, if you feel like answering both at the same time, you know, do you have any tips for what therapy looks like in real life and how people can go about that?
So at first I was really happy because I think that therapy is really important for everyone, especially if you have served in the armed forces, if you have done anything that has like seriously impacted you trauma-wise, like it's good to talk about it. And no matter what you've experienced, therapy is always going to be a rewarding experience if you find a good therapist to work with and to work through things that you have to deal with emotionally. But I really got upset when they showed that they were just going to steamroll over Bucky's actual mental health progress and just force him back into work. And the sad thing is, like, this happens in real life. So I was just like, oh no, like I was hoping that we'd be able to get more of a positive representation for therapy than that. And I know that they were playing parts of it for laughs. And I know that they were like, well, we have to get back to the plot. But like IRL, the plot that you want to get back to, your regular life before your trauma, there's no way to get back to that without processing what's happened and without talking about it. So I really, I went through a roller coaster of, he's getting help. Oh my, what is this? Like, that was,
Yeah. The therapist opened her mouth and I was immediately like, oh, we're going for this kind of realism. This is disappointing. Because I'm going to be spicier on this panel than I was on Tuesday. The therapist is actually really realistic. There are therapists like that. I hate them. And they're the bane of my existence. She's a good depiction of everything I believe therapy should no longer be. But she is also a good depiction of what a lot of military and like cop therapists are, which is incredibly problematic, realistic. So like if that's what they were going for, but also that's going to deter people from going to therapy.
Maybe they hired a military consultant.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like even like obviously there's going to be some dramatic license when you're working with superheroes and things like that, but even within mandated therapy, folks are still entitled to confidentiality, consent. She walked right up to Sam and was like, "Oh, I've heard all about you."
I know. That was the biggest thing that as a person who's been in therapy for a long time, my therapist, I agree, Cassie, is not like that. B, she did that. I was like, heard of HIPAA? Like what is going on?
She Hydra.
Wild.
We don't have HIPAA here. We have Hydra.
We have Hydra. Forcing Sam into there, like what?
But at the same time, though, I'm actually gonna say something here that is not going to be very popular.
All right,
because of the mandated nature of that therapy and the relationship to the organizations and them being in the police and the like violation of parole and things like that. There's actually a possibility that wasn't a violation of HIPAA, which is terrible.
That's true. That's very true. Which is like equally horrifying.
Yeah, I feel like, gosh, that's very true. But one of the things that she did that I had a real big problem with, one of the many things, is she really wanted to tell him what he should and shouldn't be feeling. He tried to express his emotions. And yeah, he wasn't being authentic, but like not exactly a safe space. I wouldn't have been either.
Yeah.
And she was just like, no, I've been where you are, I've done what you did, and this is how you react to
Yeah.
such a thing. And so leaving no space for just how he's, that is definitely not therapeutic or helpful, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you all, for folks watching who are maybe, I know like I was very nervous to go to therapy the first time because of things like that. You don't know who you're going to get. And you're like, oh my gosh, like, how am I going to navigate this? How do you even figure out who's going to be a good fit for you? Do you all have any advice for sort of the process of working to find a therapist that is the good fit for you, or maybe even if you've been seeing somebody who you feel like isn't helping you, sort of how do you navigate that?
Well, I have to find someone who sees me as a human being who deserves equal rights before anything else. So I just don't see therapists that aren't Black women.
Yeah.
You just can't. And then you have to, it sucks, but you have to go there and find out if they're homophobic or not. Because you can't find that out through the internet.
Yep.
For sure.
Or transphobic, and
that's I was getting to that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really legitimate thing. Like I know for me, I specifically looked for somebody who shared that she was a queer woman before I felt comfortable going with her. So yeah, I think that's a really legit thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
I think no, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. There are specific directories that cater to different identities and conditions and things like that. And so, what I would say is because it's so important to find someone who's a good fit, if you are looking for Black therapist, or a Black, femme therapist, like therapy for Black girls, right? If you're looking for a queer and BIPOC therapist, then you may want to go to the National Queer Trans Therapists of Color Network, right? Inclusive Therapists Directory has a bunch of people, and you can manage it by identity and stuff. The big directories have a lot of people, but their algorithms are really bad. So like Psychology Today has tons of providers. Psychology Today is also kind of trash because you'll search for a Black therapist, and what you'll get is literally anybody who clicked that they will see a Black person. Anybody can click that button. And so what you get is the first 10 people you see are white people. And you have to be careful with the directories now because BetterHelp has been buying up the directories and just throwing their therapists on there. By the way, please be very, very cautious of any of these online therapy places like BetterHelp and Talkspace and Cerebral and everything. They don't protect your data, they sell your data, and they also treat us terribly. And so that would be, the better written that you can find, like when people find me, I have like my whole thing is like, hey, I'm Black, I'm queer, I work with Black queer people, I may work with some other people of color if we're a good fit. I do trauma work, and I don't use behavioral modalities because they're damaging to the populations and the specialty I work under, which is trauma. And so you can read people's stuff, and you can ask for a consultation call, a short, like 15-minute at max consultation call to gauge fit before you spend your money.
And speaking of spending the money, the worst part is like just finding one that your insurance will pay for, because my insurance is like, oh, they're not in network, so you pay out of pocket, have fun.
Yeah, definitely ask about sliding scales if that's something y'all need. I know sometimes it can feel weird to ask about that sort of stuff. So I'm giving you all a little permission card if you need it. Please ask therapists you're going to see if you don't have insurance, if they do have a sliding scale. Obviously, not all of them will, but a lot, particularly of the, the therapists that are coming up now and doing more modern work tend to be have that available if they can. Krisha, you were gonna say something earlier, I think.
Yeah, I was just going to add with the consultation calls that Cassie was talking about. I think that's becoming more and more common to have a free call where you can just sort of chat. And I guess I would say don't be afraid to ask really direct questions about what you want, what you don't want, what makes you comfortable, what makes you uncomfortable, because if the therapist that you are talking to, excuse me, gets offended or defensive or something about the questions that you're asking, that kind of tells you that that's not the one that you want to go with. And so I know it can be incredibly anxiety provoking to have really direct conversations with someone, which I know is, a lot of times part of why people seek therapy. And I recognize that. But the therapeutic relationship is so important. Being with someone that you feel comfortable with is just so important for healing. So yeah, I really think that just being really direct, as direct as you feel comfortable being, can be just really important. So you're not wasting your time, or your money.
Yeah, for sure. The asking really direct questions is excellent advice. No holding back, just straight up ask them what you need and want to know. So another really, I think this was a depiction of mental health and mental distress in the MCU that has gotten a lot of conversation around it. We're about to have Endgame spoilers. If you haven't seen Endgame yet, I'm confused, but also please cover your ears. So in Endgame, we see Thor having a rough time, having a bad time. And it's been interesting, the discussions around that depiction. There were some really good parts of it and some really cringe parts of it. And I'm curious how you all would categorize those things. Like, what was there anything about that depiction that you were like, yes, hell yeah, that sounds green, or anything that you were extra like, oh my gosh, I can't believe like they approached it this way?
Well, the sad thing is, as someone who really enjoys the Thor movies, Janae, you've noticed that there doesn't seem to be space in Asgardian culture to tell someone I'm not okay. There never has been. Like, every time anyone even looks remotely kind of sad, oh, cheer up, everything is fine. We live in Shangri-La. Like when is anyone ever given space to be fragile in that kind of culture? And I just was hoping to see more. Hello?
Yeah.
So I wasn't surprised that it was going to be kind of an uphill battle to deal with the fact that you are this champion of your people and you failed and you have to get back up from that somehow, and it's going to be a long, hard road. And I'm happy that the character was able to obviously things are a bit better for him, but I think that kind of shows you need to give yourself space to not be okay. And there needs to be a way for you to recover from it without feeling like you've completely lost yourself entirely because you've never been given the tools to self-repair.
Yeah.
It was hard. I related to that though.
Yeah, interesting too, in sort of Thor's story of kind of going back and forth depending on who's writing him, but going back and forth on whether he's gotten over some of the toxic masculinity and hero complex stuff versus whether he hasn't, and kind of where he is.
Apparently it's difficult to write an evolved male character.
Yeah, unless Taika Waititi's doing it, it's a little bit of a mess. But so it's interesting, sort of in context of all of the other ways he's been portrayed.
Guess as a writer, it's hard to occupy a headspace you've never had. Anyway, anyone else have any more opinions on Thor?
We did say this was going to be the spicier panel.
Everybody's catching strays tonight.
Mhm. Yeah, Cassie or Krisha, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like I struggled with this storyline because, on the one hand, it was in many ways an accurate depiction of depression. You know, he was isolating, he was using escapism, he was playing games, watching TV,
Yeah.
you know, alcohol, you know, issues with hygiene, weight gain, all of that. You know, that's an accurate depiction, I would say, of depression. It's just that it was framed, as so many things with Thor are, as a joke, as a punchline. And so I found that to be tough, you know, to watch, very cringe to watch. On the flip side of it, though, I will say that as the movie progressed, I got real concerned that he was going to just somehow magically go back to being, you know, fit, muscular Thor for the end. And so I will say that I found it meaningful that, you know, he fought Thanos there at the end, still, you know, depressed, you know, still overweight, and he was still worthy, and he still, you know, was triumphant. And so I will say that that to me, I found to be meaningful.
Same, like Skylar, who is behind the scenes. Hi, Skylar. Is our intern who's been helping put this together. She and I had a long conversation about this because I felt similarly. I was initially like, come on now, like as a curvy person, fat person, like this is again the butt of the joke. But then yeah, like seeing him not have to get fit before he participated in the final battle was like, okay, this could have been worse. And you pulled it back a little. So yeah, that was a really you know, pros and cons. Yeah, so Morgan in the chat is talking about even his mom. Yes,
that was
so
that dialogue made me so angry. I watched the version of Endgame that has that edited out on purpose because it made me so bad.
Yeah, so like I know this wasn't the question, but I think we've got it. Like one thing that came up for me watching Thor's stuff, and then also seeing literally every character that went to Wakanda for healing was
oh my god, that's
Stark and is both beautiful and problematic because the country of magical Negroes is the compassionate ones that heal all the broken white folks feels a little on the nose. But at the same time, like I think it's also a good way of like broaching the topic of the way that culturally healing can and is different, and why it is important to pay attention to those factors. And so like when it like with Thor, like we're talking about how like Asgard has just no place for like tenderness in a way that would be helpful to someone and not just kind of degrading. And so I think it's really interesting that in the MCU so far, the place where the most actual healing technologically and just spiritually comes from Wakanda and Wakandans. We see the Dora Milaje helping Bucky. We see them help Iron Man. We see them help so many people, including themselves. And so it's not missed on me, especially as a decolonial and liberatory healer, that like their healing does include the spirit. And so there's some of the like hardness sometimes, like we saw that with Bucky, right? But it is paired with a deep love and compassion and tenderness in a way that like we do not see and Thor is not given. And so that makes me wonder, what? Like, I don't want to see it, but I can't help but wonder, like, what would have happened? Like, how would Thor's depression have journey have been different
Mm,
if he had been under the
yeah.
care of the Wakandans?
Yeah, that's such an interesting framework, especially I'm just thinking about how Thor Ragnarok spoilers, but in in Ragnarok they essentially, the movie is about revealing that Asgard is basically space white supremacy colonizer land, right? Like it's like they reveal this ceiling and they're
I'm
like,
shocked.
oh, we were colonizers. Yeah, like that, like that's the movie, right? But so like talking about that difference in cultural frames, and Jay was saying, Thor, there is no space in Asgard for folks to have that kind of journey or to have that kind of healing or break. And I just think about the ways that white supremacy culture in the States, and I'm sure other places as well, has kind of also reflected that in our own world in the ways that we treat mental health.
150%. It's my
Oh, the
entire
way they
career.
treat mental health here is to feel like it's not a problem to lock you away and say that something is
Mhm.
wrong with you. Like we could go on for days.
Yeah.
Valkyrie was not able to stay in Asgard and heal. She had to go be somebody else somewhere
Yeah.
else. That was the only
Yeah.
way for her to have a life because of what
And
happened.
also drink through it. The drinking culture lays throughout
Oh
is
yeah, the drinking culture is definitely a thing.
something.
Yep.
Yeah, so one of the things about, how Thor interacts with all the people around him in Endgame, we were talking about how it's mostly played for comedic effect, which is not great. Um, he has a mostly good conversation with his mom up until certain points. Um, but for folks who are maybe thinking about, how do we not do what Rocket the Raccoon did? How do we better support people in our lives or seek out that support from people in our lives? Are there any sort of like headline pieces of advice you would give folks for if you're struggling, sort of how to be in relationship with people and support each other, um, in a way that's healthy for everybody involved?
Unfurls 30
Don't
yard scroll. So first, oh sorry. Sorry.
don't tell people to get over it. Stop with the toxic positivity. Not
Mhm.
everything has to be hunky dory. Conflict can be generative. Like, just stop with the nice, like the
Mhm.
white niceness, like the white culture niceness thing, where like it has to be nice versus being helpful,
Mhm.
or being healing is not helpful at all, right? There is
Mhm.
kindness, there is compassion. But when someone comes to us, sometimes the the best thing you can do is to tell them you don't have space,
Mhm.
is to acknowledge your own boundaries and limitations and help them within the capacity that you have, and then move from there, whether that's connecting them with somebody else, whether that's, waiting until another time. Like, you
Mhm.
can't be all things for all people, and sometimes you are not equipped to help.
Mhm.
So don't make it worse by practicing outside your scope.
Yeah. My one of my closest friends and I have uh I'm missing the word for this right now, but we have a phrase that we say to each other when we're in that space. If one of us texts each other something and we just like do not have a single, not even a plastic spoon to give in that conversation, but we want to convey that we have empathy and we heard them. This is where I'm gonna do a cross fandom thing, but we use the phrase "that's rough, buddy," as spoken by Zuko when Sokka's talking about his girlfriend turned into the moon. And it's our way of just very quickly being like, I don't actually know what to say to this. I don't have the energy to respond to this deeply, but I heard you, and I hope you're okay. Sometimes like those sorts of things between friends, just lay it out there and talk it out in advance can really help. Yeah, Krishna or Jay?
Yeah, I think just acknowledging too that you don't have to fix anyone else's problems. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of times I think there's a lot of stress around trying to be there for a friend, you know, because it's, well, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help. And, you know, a lot of times it really is just being there and listening if you're able, you know, if you have the space for it. But, you know, I think a lot of times trying to fix someone's problem or trying to tell them what they should do, that actually can make things worse, you know. So really just being there and just being present and listening can go just an incredibly long way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jay, you got anything?
The fun part of going last is that y'all already said everything.
You're like, my job here is done. Well, I think we would be absolutely remiss to not talk about Wanda Maximoff in this conversation. Speaking of characters who don't maybe use the resources at their disposal or don't feel like they're safe to use the resources around them, I think in the context of the conversation we've been having, there's a lot of interesting
if we're doing Wanda,
stuff.
can we do this chronologically?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Where do you want to start, Jay? Bring us in.
So
Paint
when
us a
she was a
picture.
small child growing up in a poor Eastern European country
Yep.
with no resources outside of whatever her family was able to scrape together,
Mm-hmm.
and then she was orphaned. At what point between the orphaning and the having to join a terrorist group because she didn't see any other way of bringing truth, of speaking truth to power, did this child get any support?
When was she supposed to be well adjusted? Is that
Like,
your question?
Yes. Like, they skipped over a lot, clearly.
Oh, yeah.
But,
They sure did.
Let's assume she's roughly 18, God, I hope, by the time they sign up to go get injected with who knows what. And
you know she wasn't an adult.
I know she wasn't, but like the horror of thinking about her being like 14 or something. Like, if they had hired a child actress to play her in that scene, I think I would have cried. Like that. You know the scene I'm talking about when she's in the cell.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, I couldn't have lived through that. But like, and I guess this is like, it in many ways it's not as well represented as what they wanted from the comic books. When I say they, I mean me. I mean like us comic book fans, because we don't get to have Wanda be Jewish. We don't get to have Wanda be Romani. We have to deal with this whitewashed version of the character. And then we see that she's allied herself with Hydra because she's angry at Tony Stark. And that, so we're trying to understand the headspace of what she's going through. And it's really hard for people to see sympathy for a character that, you know, willingly joined up with this group. But then I'm like, okay, but how willing do you have to be in a situation where you have nothing and everything was taken away from you by, you know, Westerners who are ruining your country? So I felt a lot of empathy for her at that point. And the journey that she takes on from that point onward, I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's like watching a slow motion train wreck. And that's why I was like, I kind of want to start from the beginning to talk about how poor her mental health had to have been to be in this situation in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you end up putting this person on an international stage and giving her like this immense power over other people in terms of having to use your abilities to save folks. Meanwhile, you don't even know what you're doing. And you've never gotten to have help. We don't see her get to have any help. We don't see her get to talk to anybody after losing her brother. Like, where was her grief counseling? Where was like any kind of support at all, other than a place to live that wasn't a pile of rubble? I guess that was nice, but like, I wanted to see this character get some kind of support that wasn't contingent on her being a superhero, whatever that means, even though she personally had to have some really conflicted beliefs on that, because superheroes are what, like, you know, ruined everyone's lives.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing, is starting from the beginning and acknowledging what she went through. We also have to acknowledge the fact that this is a whitewashed but perfect case of somebody with medical trauma and who has been absolutely brutalized by institutions over and over and over again. So why on earth would she trust a therapist that was employed by the UN or the Sokovia Accords or literally anybody.
Yeah.
And at what point was she expected to find one herself that she could trust, right? Like that wouldn't automatically assume that what she is saying she can do isn't delusions, right? We have somebody with immense power who has been through so much that the only people who would believe it especially at the time, right? Especially if we're talking like pre-Avengers and everything, right? The only people who would believe that she wasn't completely off her rocker would be the very people who've been brutalizing her literally all of her life on both sides and using her. And so when we talk about Wanda and like, oh, well, she should have gotten help or she should have reached out. What? To who? Literally everyone in her life, right?
Yeah.
Outside of her brother who experienced a lot of the same. And even at points, her brother used her and abused her.
You talking about the comic book version now?
It's right, MCU.
Yeah, thank you. I was like, hold up.
Okay. Not including her brother for this conversation.
Okay.
I mean, with the exception of the use of a fake version of her brother in the show.
Okay, but that wasn't Dead Pietro's fault.
Yeah.
People don't know comic book Pietro is a scrub in the definition of I don't want no scrubs. He's the scrubbiest man this side of the Andromeda galaxy. You don't want none. Anyway.
Yeah. And so like we have trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. And in all honesty, right, people are so, and this happens in real life, people are so quick to be like, oh, Wanda, she should have known better. She shoulding all over her. Right. And Wanda is incredibly adaptive. Wanda is doing what she learned to do to survive and to heal herself. And I think that, is it optimal? Is it what we want to see? No, of course not. But is her life what we want to see? No. And so that is something when we're talking about trauma and trauma healing, which a lot of healing is trauma healing at the end of the day, right? We have to honor and understand the ways in which these things that we demonize and that we hate about ourselves and everything are actually really adaptive and are protecting us and have served us in some way, shape, or form, even if they're not right now and even if it doesn't seem like it linearly, right? And so I need people to come at Wanda with a little more empathy here because, it's not what we want to see. And she tried to do things the right way. And what did they do? They specifically triggered her.
I would have loved to have seen her find a Sokovian group of refugees like to like meet up with in New York, because I'm telling you, if New York has anything, they have refugees from all over the world. It would have been so nice to see her meet people from her country and like, because you know how the best thing that all comic book fans love, whether it's movies, TV show, comic books, is slice of life stuff with our superheroes. That's why people were so excited for like what they saw in the WandaVision trailer. It looked very slice of lifey, and I would have loved to have seen more of that. Like that would have been so good. That's a dream. Ugh.
Yeah, Morgan made a comment. Can you imagine if she was allowed to have a Jewish Romani community around her to support her?
That would have been so nice.
Yeah, I think that just like thinking about that in the context of everything you shared tonight, Cassie, and just imagining sort of what that would have looked like could have been. Krisha, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I think this all shows too, one of the things I loved about WandaVision, was that recognition of why a lot of times we do escape into TV, why we all are here in fandom and watching this stuff and loving it, because when we feel isolated and we don't feel like, we can get support from the people around us, or if we just feel like as desperately alone, as Wanda had been so many times over the course of her life, TV's easy. You know, it's there. It's not going to judge you. You can know the genres and know what to expect for the most part. You know, her comment about, you know, no, he's not going to get hurt. It's not that kind of show. You know, the inherent safety that can come from some TV, you know, TV that you know and trust. And so, you know, I thought that was sad. You know, ultimately, like it's sad to see that was her one refuge. But at the same time, I think we're all here in fandom because we do get, you know, meaning from these stories. So I found it to be relatable on that level too.
For sure. I was going to say, like, I think I agree with the both sides of it, right? Of like, it's sad that is the only thing she had, but also so relatable with, like, she essentially used her fandom as her coping mechanism, right? Like that was her escape. And I think that's definitely
I wish she had just made a dollhouse instead.
Just like a little baby version.
Yes.
I wanted to going off our question script a little bit, but I just like, especially the more I listen to folks talk about Wanda, just thinking about the gender dynamics of it all, because every other example we've talked about tonight has been a masked character. And the difference in the way that both Wanda is portrayed and the way she's been received is, unfortunately, I think, pretty realistic to the ways in which mask folks versus femme folks are expected and able to sort of present their grief and their pain and their trauma and what that looks like and what they have access to. And I don't think that was an intentional analysis by, the writers of MCU.
What do you mean?
I actually, so like this may be unexpected. I think Wanda's grief actually is not a typical portrayal of feminine grief because it's externalized.
Yeah.
Feminine grief is internalized, right? And masculine grief is stereotypically externalized. And so Wanda's grief is very specifically masculine, right? Which I think is actually kind of cool. Because it's literally externalized over this entire town. And so you've got this juxtaposition of this character who is being portrayed very femme. We have the 50s housewife, we've got the, 60s hippie mom, we have all of these very feminine tropes with a portrayal of a grief motif that is massively masculine because it is put on everyone else. And so even in that regard, you've got this interesting commentary on power, right? Because we also don't tend to see as a society, like, feminine grief is quiet, it's internalized, it is not particularly impactful, and it's not seen as particularly powerful the way that masculine grief is. And so we have that immediately, like, okay, well, we have this feminine person, but like, she's basically a god. So what does that mean? And so we have this explosion, and we have this very violent, like, explosion of grief that is tearing at people secretly, we find out later. And at the same time, though, that internalization over the entire town is very feminine. And so I actually really like the juxtaposed gender dynamics when it comes to, like, the theories of grief and what we see in the show in that way, because it's actually not stereotypical.
Yeah. Yeah, you're getting some love in the comments for putting that into words for people. So with our last, like, I can't believe this hour is almost up already, but with our last like bit of time here, I'd love to just play a game of like, how would you fix it? How would you, if you all were in charge of writing what the mental health resource portrayal looks like in the MCU or in the comics, if you would like. What would you put in? Like, is there anything you would immediately be like, oh, I wish like they had shown this character doing this, or like, I hope that in the future they address this.
There
Does
is a
anything pop up?
canonical Marvel therapist that should have his own show.
Oh my
Like in the
God.
comics, he should have his own show. I would love. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. So obviously, part of me is like, no, we shouldn't be able to watch people's sessions. That's so that's so intrusive. But like, they're not real people, so sure, we can watch them.
But, yeah. Yep.
But
And
yeah,
you
I
can
think
watch
that-
real people's sessions if they consent to it.
Yes, exactly. So we'll just say that She-Hulk can break the fourth wall and go, you can watch mine, it's fine. So I think that would be fantastic if they were to do that. I would love to see everyone get to visit Doc Samson and talk about their feelings. That would be wonderful. So I
It'd be
think
an incredible
that
show.
seeing him should be mandatory for any active Avenger. And if you're not comfortable with him, they have a list of other people who are not allowed to tell S.H.I.E.L.D. anything about what you guys talked about unless you consent to it. So I think that would be a wonderful thing to see, that mental health is just as important as physical health, because if you're not physically capable to serve, then they don't make you. And if you're not mentally able to serve, then you should definitely take a break. Like, I wish that mental health was taken more seriously in the MCU than it is in real life. I think that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Oh man. If I could change anything, I would definitely have something that's just baked into it like everything else. Like it's just the part of the way it is. That would be so cool. I would love to see that, because that helps normalize things. When you see things in media, it helps people understand what is happening in real life. And people, like, I literally was able to talk to my mom about being gay because she had seen what show was it? I can't even remember, but there was some show back when, like 20 years ago, that she was like, oh yeah, you're like one of those people. Yes. So yeah, helping normalize things through popular media is super helpful for everybody, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would love to see a show or multiple shows, like Jay said, where it's sort of centered around, or it comes back into the therapy room to talk about things, because I think there are a lot of things in the MCU that are just really rich, exciting things to talk about. But I think that sometimes a general audience doesn't make those deeper connections. And so I feel like one of the things that therapy can do is help us make those connections for ourselves, of, okay, I've had these experiences and I had these feelings, like, why, what is going on? And therapy can help like ground you back and understand. And so I would love to see it in that context, to also to show therapy and to show it being normalized and prioritized, but then also to like pull some of these bigger threads in the fiction, in the stories and the plots, to a general audience. I think Loki is a great example of that. Like, Loki is, I love that show. I loved digging into all of the self-reflection and the struggle that he had going on within himself. But I do think being able to have that grounded more specifically to help a general audience sort of follow some of those threads, not like spoon feeding it, but just, I don't know, something that grounds some of those bigger concepts.
Yeah.
I would love to see that.
I want to see the MCU get away from mandated therapy. I think that's one thing that like does happen in the real world and everything, and I want to see it stop here too. I want to see someone want to go. I want to see the perspective of healing from someone who's not being forced into it. I want to see people come to their own healing, and we see little bits and pieces of that. And I also feel like it doesn't have to be white Western therapy. It doesn't have to be talk
Mhm.
therapy necessarily. But I would like to see some things centered around healing and actually specifically highlighting the different ways that can be done and showing a willingness to do it, and not just, well, the Sokovia Accords say you have to, well, you're in prison, well, the government said, well, this, and it's part of your parole and things like that, because those are also very specific kinds of therapy. And let's be really honest, they're very low pay, they're very high stress, they're very high caseload. And those are situations where you don't get to pick your therapist. And so a lot of times people have
Mhm.
really poor fits. And so it's very poor therapy, which is what we saw in Falcon Winter Soldier. So I
Mhm.
would like to see more instances of people seeking out, and these superheroes seeking out their own healing, so that we're moving beyond these poor fits and just whoever is willing to work for these grossly unethical agencies. Like, it, I have a lot of feelings, and we won't go into them about working with agencies like that, but
Mhm.
that I think would help a lot, because even with, it's not a great portrayal, but I think what they did with Moon Knight, spoilers for Moon Knight, there's promise in that if they were willing to be a little weirder.
Mhm.
Like, if they weren't trying to be so family friendly and like quippy all the time, like
Yeah.
that journey through the desert, like that was an amazing piece of parts therapy and like
Mhm.
discussion there. And so, like, there were not great parts there too, but if the MCU wasn't so married to tying everything up neatly and being so
Mhm.
clean, I
Mhm.
think they could do a lot more, and I think it would show a lot more healing. But that's the other thing, is healing is messy.
Yeah.
That's my favorite quote of the night. There's promise if they're willing to be a little weirder. I'm using that for everything now.
So great summary. You all are amazing. You all have said so many brilliant things tonight. Thank you all for joining us. With our final few minutes, for folks who are here in the chat or maybe showed up because they were specifically interested in resources or finding their way with mental health, do you have a, not necessarily connected to Marvel, but a general piece of advice you might share with folks who are looking for places to start or how to maybe get better therapy or resources than they have been getting?
Yeah. So first things first is find a therapist that you feel you can be open with. I went
Mhm.
through therapy with people I hated. It was never going to work. And be willing to see the value in it. We taught, like, there's a lot of barriers, uh, especially over the last couple of years. There's so much therapist burnout and people leaving the field, and people stop taking insurance because insurance is horrible to take. And that's something
Mhm.
that people don't understand, is the nuances around insurance and your therapist contract being with the insurance company, not you, also
Mhm.
limits like the ability for sliding scale and things. I can't offer people using their insurance sliding scale. It's against my contract with their insurance company,
Mhm.
right? And so when you're looking for therapy, you know, asking for what you need. There are more and more funds to help people afford therapy. See what's in your
Mhm.
area. Talk to people around you. See if you can work out deals with therapists. Find who the good ones are. And also remember that um, we don't have a monopoly on healing. And so, if you're struggling with your standard run of the mill therapist, be open to finding your healing in other ways, because therapy is great. And I think therapy should be for everyone. And I want insurance to do better so that it actually covers things and so that it makes us therapists want to take it instead of making us feel like taking it is going to put us on the street, right? And that's not where we're at right now. Join with therapists to help us advocate for that, and look at groups, look at other healing modalities that speak to you. Talk to your friends and families and communities about what kind of healing your people have done over the years. Yes, you will find some bad stuff. You will. Congrats. That's history. And also, you will find some things that have been deeply helpful and fulfilling. As a Black person, drumming and spirituality and herbalism and all of these things are a deep part of my own healing in addition to therapy. So yeah, don't give up. Just because you can't find a therapist doesn't mean that you can't work towards your healing through other avenues while you're looking.
That was such a juicy one-liner there at the end.
Yeah, I guess one thing I would say is that I hear a lot in fandom circles about folks who, have been impacted by a piece of fiction, or they're impacted by something happening in their fandom, but they don't feel comfortable talking to their therapist about it, even though it's something that is important and emotional and meaningful. And so I would just say that to never shy away. If you have a good relationship with a therapist and you feel comfortable with them, bringing fandom and fiction into the room, into that relationship, can be a really helpful, powerful thing. Whether it's talking about, a storyline or a character that was meaningful for you, or, bringing in clips, to watch scenes, or, whatever it is, fan fiction can be really healing. There's so many ways to bring geekdom, I guess, into therapy. And so I would encourage people to not feel embarrassed to bring it up, to ask for that. And again, when you're looking for a therapist, ask if they're into that, or if they understand it, see if they, see what the reaction is there. Because stories are important. Stories move us. That's why we love this stuff.
I send my therapist my TikTok that resonated the most with me every week.
I love when my clients send me things. So much.
Here you go. Unpack this one. Jay, do you have anything to add? You're on mute also.
I had to mute because my cat was being loud.
Oh, well, universal problems.
Exactly. No, nothing to add, but like everyone, y'all are amazing. So I'm just like taking notes myself, like, this is good advice. Thank you.
Everyone is amazing. This has been an incredible panel. Thank you all for joining us, for hanging out in the chat with us. I know there are more events for the next couple of days. I believe there's a community hangout tomorrow. There's a kids' day on Saturday. Maybe if we have a banner for that, we can put that up. But where can we find you all once we depart this eve, if we want to continue to follow your work, which I'm sure we all do. I know I do. Cassie, what are you up to? Where can folks find you?
I am up to a lot of things. Hello. Sure. You can find me. My link tree is on my Twitter. So @mentalwoke on Twitter is a great place to be. I-cch.com is my website for myself and my practice. If you are a clinician, I have a training coming up on May 14th where we're going to be talking about joy, pleasure, and play as liberatory trauma work. And so we're going to play some games. We're going to dance. It's going to be great. I have a bunch of other stuff coming up, so check it out.
Love that. Krisha, what about you?
Yeah, I am Dr. Fangirl PhD kind of everywhere. So I mostly hang out on Twitter for reasons that defy understanding. It's been a lot lately, but yeah. Usually,
Yep.
it's usually where I'm hanging out.
Awesome. And Jay, I feel like if people are following us and they don't know who and where you are at this point, what have you all
just
been
in case
missing?
there's some new people.
Just in
Hi.
case.
You can find me at that J Justice on all the things. I'm a game developer making my first 2 video games that'll be coming out this year. If you like space and fun stuff that might be a little spooky, a little science fiction-y, you'll enjoy it. I also do costumes. I have like 120 costumes and I have more coming. And I stream on Twitch. So yeah, just come hang out. We'll talk about Marvel comic books, DC, Dark Horse, Image, Star Wars, Star Trek, Stargate, all the things. I'm a huge nerd and you'll have fun.
I'm a huge nerd and you'll have fun.com. Thank you all so much. Everybody have a great evening and I hope we get to hang out with y'all again. Thank y'all.